the Cline Falls State Park Axeman. In July of 1977, two Yale undergraduates, Terry Jentz and Avra Goldman, decided to spend their summer biking the new Trans-America Trail. On July 22nd, they stopped at Cline Falls State Park in a remote area of Oregon to camp for the night. Shortly after falling asleep, a truck drove over a hill into their campsite and ran over their tent with the woman inside. Injured, Jentz figured that it had been an accident and expected the driver to help out, but they were shocked to see a man in a cowboy hat emerge from the truck with an axe. He used his weapon to attack Jentz and Goldman, before climbing back into his truck and driving away, leaving them to die. Both women were seriously wounded but still alive. Jentz managed to stumble to a nearby road and flag down a teenage couple driving through the park and led them back to the campsite. As they were attempting to help Avra Goldman, who had sustained a serious head wound, they saw the lights of another vehicle approaching them. It came to a brief stop before turning around and driving away. They suspected that the pickup truck driver had returned to finish the job, but he fled the scene after seeing other people there. Jentz and Goldman were rushed to the hospital, and both of them survived despite suffering various injuries. The investigation eventually uncovered a suspect named Dick Dam, who was a known violent offender in the community. In 1995, while being detained for another crime, Dam was questioned about Cline Falls State Park attack and given 2 polygraph tests. He showed signs of deception, but the results were inconclusive since he had illegal drugs in his system. Unfortunately, there is no physical evidence tying him to the crime, and he remains free. 37 years later, no one has ever been officially charged with the attack. Theresa Ann Bier. On June 1, 1987, Fresno native Theresa Ann Bier, a then 16-year-old, traveled into the rugged Sierra Nevada mountains of California with then 43-year-old Russell Welch. It was well known at the time that Welch was an avid Bigfoot enthusiast, in fact a self-proclaimed expert on the creature, and the two allegedly had embarked out into the wilderness on a quest to find the legendary beast in the vicinity of Shut-Eye Peak. Welch claimed to have had contact with Bigfoot in the past and wanted to share his experiences with the teenaged Teresa. What happened after the pair arrived at Shut-Eye Peak is not known. All that is known is that Russell Welch returned to Fresno without Theresa Ann Bier. A few days passed, and after the girl made no efforts to contact her family, Welch was considered a person of interest in her possible disappearance. He initially claimed that Teresa ran away from him on June 1st, but then he changed his story. Welch eventually stated that Teresa had been forcibly taken by Bigfoot. A search of the area where the two had camped was immediately ordered, but failed to turn up anything. Despite the continued efforts of dedicated searchers, no sign of Theresa Ann Bier was found. Welch was eventually charged with child stealing. However, in September 1987, only 3 days before he was supposed to go on trial, authorities dropped the charges. They had offered to recommend a 1-year sentence if Welch signed a waiver allowing them to go forward with murder charges if Teresa's body was located, but Welch refused. The prosecution decided to drop the case to avoid double jeopardy, which forbids a suspect from being charged twice for the same crime, meaning his release would allow authorities to later charge him with the most serious charge of murder in the event of discovery of the body. However, absolutely no sign of Theresa Ann Bier has been found in nearly 25 years, and the case remains unsolved. Julianne Williams and Laura Winans. 24-year-old Julianne Williams and her girlfriend and partner, 26-year-old Laura Winans, went on a camping trip along the Appalachian Trail at Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. Winans also brought along her pet golden retriever named Taj. Nearly 2 weeks later, after neither of the women's families had heard from them, the authorities were notified. when park rangers launched a search on June 1st, they came upon a campsite and discovered that Williams and Winans had been brutally murdered. The killer had stripped the women of their clothes, bound and gagged them, and slit their throats. Winans' golden retriever was also found wandering around the area unharmed. Given the woman's sexual orientation and the brutal and calculated nature of the murders, authorities wondered if they were victims of a hate crime. An incarcerated man named David Darrell Rice became a suspect in the case. He was known for expressing his hatred toward women and homosexuals, and had also been arrested in 1997 after an attempted abduction of a female bicyclist in the Shenandoah Park. He eventually served a 10-year sentence for the abduction attempt. Investigators continued to investigate him in the double homicide, and in April 2002, Rice was indicted on capital murder charges in the Shenandoah Park killings, with authorities claiming he targeted Williams and Winans out of a hatred for women and homosexuals. However, 2 years later, the charges against Rice were dropped once it was determined that DNA and hair samples from the crime scene did not match him. Additional testing revealed that the hair found was visually similar under a microscope to that of a known serial killer, Richard Evanets. In June 2002, Evanets was about to be arrested for an unrelated crime, but he ended up killing himself as the police closed in on him. Forensic evidence eventually linked Evanets to the unsolved murders of 3 teenage girls from the mid-1990s. Since these crimes also occurred in Virginia around the same time Williams and Winans were murdered, Evanets is considered a suspect, but thus far nothing else has connected him to the crime. David Gonzales. In July of 2004, 9-year-old David Gonzales was camping with his family at Big Bear Lake campsite in Northern California's San Bernardino National Forest. At 8 a.m., David Gonzales asked his mother if he could have the car keys. There was a box of cookies in the car, and he wanted a treat. The mother gave him the keys and watched as he made his way towards the car, which was only 50 yards away. She turned her back for a second, and when she looked around, Gonzales was gone. When a cursory search of the area turned up no sign of the boy, the authorities were contacted. His mother reported that she heard no sound at all when her back was turned, though she did see a beige truck speeding out of the campground around the time that her son went missing. Since there were no signs of abduction, authorities did not pursue that lead. The cookies that Gonzales went to get were still in his family's locked van, so he never made it to the car. An intensive 9-day search of the area failed to find any trace of the boy. No blood, no scraps of clothing, or any other signs of struggle. The only clue that was turned up was some witnesses who claimed to have seen the boy walking along a road near the campsite not long after he disappeared. Almost a year later, hikers stumbled upon the boy's remains about a mile from his family's campsite, in an area that had already been well searched. The remains showed no signs of trauma or injury. Yet, despite this, the prevailing theory was that he had been attacked and dragged off by a mountain lion. This seems to be a rather odd conclusion, considering that the mother had been right there when David had gone missing, yet had heard no screams or sounds of struggle, and there had been no blood or any evidence that such a violent attack had taken place. Others have said that the boy simply wandered off and had been injured and died of exposure to the elements. Authorities are not entirely sure of what happened, and the case remains unsolved. Rosario Gayete, Francisco Valeriano, and Pilar Ruiz. On January 19, 1989, a farmer in a small town of Macastre, Spain, went into his shed and found the corpse of a teenage girl lying in his bed. The door of the shed had been forced. He entered through the back door, whose door was ajar, and found a girl dressed in a pair of jeans lying on the bed. She seemed to be asleep, but when he tried to wake her up, he realized that she was dead. He immediately notified the police. The girl was identified as 15-year-old Rosario Gayete, who had left her home 5 days earlier to go on a camping trip with her boyfriend Francisco Valeriano and her friend Pilar Ruiz. The three teens were from Valencia and had a history of doing drugs and getting into trouble. Nobody has seen them since the day they went on camping. According to Rosario's autopsy, she had died from a cardiac arrest, probably triggered by a drug overdose of something. The authorities speculated that Rosario and her friends stayed in the shed to escape the cold weather. While resting in the shed, Rosario took an untraceable drug and overdosed. Francisco and Pilar then ran out of the cabin, either looking for help or fleeing the scene. The Civil Guard, Spain's national police force, launched a search looking for them. In the vicinity of the shed, researchers found tracks of at least 4 individuals. There were also traces of horses, sheep, and other animals, as well as tracks of several vehicles. On January 27th, a woman found an amputated foot in a waste container in Valencia. The police suspected it belonged to one of the missing teens. Then, on April 8th, some farmers looking for asparagus found the body of Francisco Valeriano among some bushes. By its position, it was deduced that Francisco had fled from the shed to collapse a few meters away. The body was about 400 meters from the shed, hidden among some bushes in an advanced state of decomposition. His autopsy was inconclusive, but it is believed that he might have died from the same untraceable drug that Rosario took. Finally, on May 24th, a group of children playing near the Forrata Reservoir, located next to the River Magro in a ditch near Turis, found the supposed corpse of Pilar. She was missing her right hand and her left foot, both of which had been removed with a chainsaw. Her face was disfigured, and even though the police insisted it was the missing girl, Pilar, the family disagreed. They pointed out that the body had a scar which Pilar didn't have. Yearly, her hand was later found at a bus stop miles away from the body. Then, in 1999, the case took another strange turn when some skeletal remains were found in Macastra that matched Pilar's sister's DNA. Regardless of this find, the previous discovery in 1989 shifted the focus of the case into a murder investigation. This murder investigation suggested that the first 2 victims, Francisco and Rosario, may have been intentionally poisoned. A few days before Rosario's body was found, witnesses reported seeing her and her friends at a local bar in Macastra. Interestingly, Macastra is an hour away from where the teens had planned to camp. It seems that somebody must have given them a ride. This person might have taken them to the bar and then led them to the shed where Rosario was found. Whether voluntarily or by force, Francisco and Rosario died after ingesting something lethal or poisonous. Pilar presumably tried to escape but was killed and dismembered. According to the teens' autopsies, all 3 of them died between January 16th and 17th. There have been no leads or suspects. Some have suggested a connection to the Alcazar murders, an incident in 1992 in which 3 teenage girls were brutally raped and murdered near Valencia. While their murderers were officially caught, one of the men escaped and is still on the run. However, there is no evidence to connect the 2 cases, and the case remains unsolved.